Welcome to another Sunday morning rant. I've been a bit quiet for the last couple of weeks. It's not because I've just been doing other things. My voice is a little bit coarse this morning. I was doing far too much singing last night. I actually went to see the Illegal Eagles, who are a Eagles tribute band, obviously being called the Illegal Eagles, and they. I have to be honest and say it was a very, very good show. They were crisp, they were tight, they were clean. It was superb. And sort of the last hour of the show, all I can say is they just went into party mode, and we had sort of stuff from Glen Fry, and we had stuff from Don Henley, as well as stuff from the Eagles being pumped out. It was very good. People were dancing in the aisles, bouncing up and down, singing way too much to these songs that are sort of my youth. I'm showing my age a bit. Mind you, having said that, everybody around me was probably slightly older than me anyway, so did it matter? I was probably the youngster. Very good. If you get the chance to go and see the Illegal Eagles, if they're in a town near you, suggest you go and do it because they're very, very good. So, first thing on the rant. If you look behind me, you'll notice my DX7 is round the wrong way at the moment. That's probably because yesterday I was doing some work on it to put an Icy Connector on so I can put it into my UPS, because I couldn't put it into my UPS up till now, because it had one of these on the end, which is a plug. Okay, and nothing wrong with the plug, mind you, but my UPS is an IC connector, and by IC connector I mean it has a male on one end and a female on one end, which takes that style of connector. Okay, so obviously I've fitted that style of connector on there. There's the style of connector that goes into that. Okay, and that's what goes into the back of the UPS unit, which is buried beneath me somewhere. When I cut cable off, so there you are, cut cable off, I then opened the plug up and I realised that the plug itself is fitted with a 13 amp fuse, which is all legit. I mean, you know, this is in the UK. That's how we wire our electrics up. We have a fuse in the plug normally, and then typically there'll be a fuse probably on the transformer somewhere, wherever that transformer happens to be. In this, that will be buried in the heart of the keyboard somewhere. There'll be a transformer board on there with probably a glass slow blow fuse in it. However, the reason for picking this up is that you should always make sure that the fuses that are in the equipment are appropriate for the use of the equipment. So, to give you an idea, relating to fuses, in the UK, a 1 amp draw is 240 watts. That's in the UK. 1 amp draw is 240 watts. Most of this equipment, I think this is the heaviest piece of equipment, other than amplifiers, but this is the heaviest piece of equipment in terms of current draw or power drawage, and this draws something like 65 watts. Okay, so way below an amp, and therefore I wouldn't expect the plug that I have on the end of that to have a fuse any heavier than 3 amps in it. Okay, and the reason why it's quite important, and people will probably sit there and listen and go and blast me off and say, you know, load of rubbish. The reason it's quite important is that, you know, you pay a lot of money for the equipment that sits in your studio. You know, these things aren't cheap. Even the legacy stuff, you know, carries a decent price. I mean, I know how much I paid for my M1. You know, it wasn't cheap. It wasn't expensive, but it wasn't cheap. And you know, I'd be quite upset if I had to go and repair this because of a power problem. Plus the fact that obviously this stuff is all getting sort of a little bit old now, and finding replacement parts for it is not the easiest thing in the world to do. So one of the things you probably want to look at is you want to look at how do you fuses, how do you fuse your equipment. I'm not quite sure how you do it on the continent. So I know in the UK we have these mouldy plugs. Into a plug goes a fuse, and it either looks like something like that, which is the traditional style, or on the modern leads you might find them with a mouldy plug already attached and a fuse holder in the middle of that plug, which you can extract with a small bladed screwdriver. But anyway, you should have a look at that. Probably no need to look at something like this where it has a 12 volt feed up from a transformer that plugs into the power socket. In those instances, you know, the transformer itself will probably have the protection built into it. Plus the fact you can see where something's going wrong with the transformer, because number one, you probably smell it. Number two, if you felt the transformer, it will be very, very warm. And transformers shouldn't run really warm. They should run, you know, sort of that you can touch them. If they're running red hot, then you know you've got probably an issue going on. Although I do know a lot of computer transformers for laptops and stuff like that run extremely hot, and I've always worried about them in the past, but you know, hey ho. But where you do need to worry about some of this stuff is the fact that, you know, buried inside here is the transformer for the keyboard. The keyboard will run, I think this one runs at 2 voltages, it's got 12 and a 5, I've no idea about some of the other stuff, but this one's definitely got 12 and a 5 volt output on it. So when you look at the inside of that, there's a transformer in there, and you've no idea what's going on in that, because A, it's sealed inside the plastic cartridge, or plastic case should I say, and probably by the time whatever's happened, the damage has already been done. So, you know, you want to try and sort of make sure that if you have a problem, it blows at the first opportunity, and this is the first line of defence. There will be another fuse in there, which will be probably the second line of defence, but it depends on how good they are when they made the transformers. So, at most, I'd expect a 3 amp if you can find them, and if you go to Maplin in the UK, you can find 1 amp fuses, and I tend to have 1 amp fuses in most of the other stuff that I've got that's not on the UPS. Okay, stuff on the UPS is slightly differently, but stuff that most of the other stuff I've got is amp to 1 amp, purely because I'm a bit anal like that. So that was the power. As I say, I didn't realise that my DX7 had a 13 amp fuse in, otherwise I would have changed it a long time ago. Second thing is probably a bit of help. I use a Behringer mixer in my studio, which is a 1U unit. I don't use it because it's the best on the market. You know, I know that there are other mixers on the market that are better, but it's more to do with space. As you can see, I've got a lot of equipment in a very small area. To have a mixing desk in this area would be an interesting exercise, if I'm honest, because I'm not quite sure where I put it. So I've gone for a 1U mixer, and the reason I went for the Behringer unit was it's not bad. You know, let's be honest. It's actually quite quiet. You know, as I've said in the past, when I sit here doing these pieces to camera, you know, most of the time my studio is actually on, so I'm looking at my amplifier and my monitors, and I can see that they're all sitting there. And as you can hear, there's no hum there at all. So the unit itself is very quiet in the way I've got it set up, which is all well and good. But the reason why I bought the unit in the first place was because it is actually it's a 16-channel stereo mixer, so as in 8 stereo channels. And working in my studio environment, most of my stuff is stereo. You know, all my keyboards are stereo, all my effects units are stereo, all my rack units are stereo, so I don't really have many mono sources. And in order to get an 8-unit stereo with a traditional mixer, I would have to have effectively 16 faders with two faders operating the left and right channels, which is something I didn't want. So the Behringer unit, even though very simple, it just gives me one pop, and I can change the gain on the stereo channel. Okay, so left and right, I alter them both at the same with the same pop. What I am after is a 16 channel stereo mixer, because I have more pieces of equipment than 8 channels. So I'm forever repatching to use different pieces of equipment. When I'm playing around at home and I'm doing live sets, you know, I use the sequencer, and quite often I use the sequencer in MIDI mode. I don't record straight into my DAW, although I probably should do more of that, but I just don't tend to do it. I come from sort of, you know, I like the keyboards to generate the sounds rather than actually recording them into the DAW, although I'm probably doing a little bit more of that now. So it would be nice to have a 16 channel stereo mixer. Now if that means I've got to buy a bigger mixer because I've got some mono channels on there, that'd be fine, but really sort of like I need more than 8. Could get away with 12, but ideally I'd like 16. But having looked at the market, I can't find any stereo mixers. Now going back a few years, I did find some stereo mixers. You know, sort of a couple of companies did them, but they seem to have dropped off the market. Now whether that means there's no requirement for stereo mixers. What I am seeing is I'm seeing sort of like professional mixers with a proportion of the mix desk handed over to stereo, but normally that's only 1 or 2 or 3 channels, because the way they're looking at it is that, you know, they're looking to sort of plug an iPod in there, or plug some sort of CD, mini disc, bloody hell, mini disc, or DAT tape type arrangement coming into the unit itself. So therefore, you know, I know there's multiple different sources coming in, and they just cater for 1 or 2 sort of stereo channels, but the rest of it then becomes a single fader for a single input rather than a stereo input. Don't know. If you do know of a stereo mixer that goes up to about 16 channels, if you just drop me a comment on the channel, that would be really, really appreciated, so that I can go and investigate it. As I said, I need to move from 8 to 16, but I can't do that as it currently stands. Anyway, see you on the flip side. End of another week.